Welcome to the Passive Income Podcast. I am your host, Dividend Dave. Please be sure to join the Passive Income Posse by clicking that subscribe button below. Super excited for today's episode. We're up to, I believe, episode number 73. Joining me is Joe. You can find him on Twitter. I believe the Twitter handle is at fire5280, if I'm not mistaken.
That's
And
correct.
Joe, go ahead and give yourself an introduction.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. My name is Joe. I originate from Denver, Colorado. That's where the 5280 comes from. Um, and I guess a little bit of background. I come from a computer animation and design background. And then a little over 10 years ago, well, I guess further back than that, I started, investing in real estate, but started heavily investing in residential real estate in 2013. So it's been about 10 years. So just been, accumulating properties over that time. Got into the short-term rental market in 2019. So got a blend of long-term rentals and short-term rentals.
Cool, cool. For the rest of us from outside of the United States, I believe there are 5,280 feet in a mile, and Denver is known as the Mile High City. So
That
that's
is
the
correct.
translation for for those of us who the rest of the world that uses metric.
Yeah, I guess living in the States my entire life, I kind of take it for granted that most of the people use the metric system. So
Cool. So yeah, I guess let's just dive right into that investing journey and sort of what got you started and go from there.
sure. I'm currently 43 years old, just turned in early April. I bought my first property. It was a primary residence in 2002, and that was uh, in Denver, Colorado. Lived there for about 4.5 years. And then was doing well in my career, was ready to kind of graduate up to, the next house, a little bit larger, maybe a little bit nicer neighborhood. And that was in spring of 2006. And during that time, there was, the real estate was going crazy. So that was the era of no, documentation, um, no or little down payments. So I was able to purchase that second home with very little down, which meant that I didn't have to sell my first home that I purchased in 2002. So that was effectively how I became, or entered the property management landlord realm. Was just being able to keep that house. It was a cool house. It was kind of like a mid-century modern, kind of a California ranch style, older home. It was built in the 70s, so it had some issues, but was able to rent it out and was actually in the red for the first year. So I was collecting 1,300 a month in rent, and I believe my mortgage payment was a little over 1,350. So right out of the gate, I was in the red. And then add any sort of repairs or maintenance and you get even deeper in the red. But my
Right.
belief was, over time rents would go up, the home would gain value. Like I wasn't really looking to supplement my income at the time. I just figured 20, 30 years down the road, I'll be glad that I have this property. It'll hopefully be paid off and it'll generate a little extra income on the side. So that was how I got started. And then got married in 2009, and my wife had a two-bedroom condo in a suburb of Denver. So when she moved in with me after we got married, again, there was no need to sell her property. And since I already had a little bit of experience operating, rental homes on the residential front, we decided to just convert that into what would become our second rental property. So did that again, it was never purchased as a rental. It was purchased as her primary. So we, we're able to make a small profit on the time or at the time, based on what she had purchased it for. But again, nothing that was really going to move the needle financially.
Right.
So just, again, accumulating. Now we had two on the books. Picked up our third when we moved to our second home, as a second home as a married couple, because we were looking to have a family, start having kids. So we needed a little bit more space. So turned that one into a rental as well. So the first three income properties we had were all homes that we had lived in as primary residence properties, and then had just moved on without selling. So at that time, had the three properties. again, nothing, no sort of windfall revenue, profit, but
Right.
the mentality was the same. If we hold on to them, eventually they're going to be paid off, and adjusted for inflation, we could pocket an extra, $4,000, $4,500 a month just to supplement our lifestyle, supplement our income. But it wasn't until 2013 where I got the wild idea that, hey, I don't actually have to live in a house and then move out of it in order to turn it into a rental. So I was, that 2013 was kind of a great time to, pick up residential real estate, at least in Colorado. We were coming out of the recession. There was, prices were very affordable, but, rents were very compelling. So I picked up a 5-bedroom property in another Denver suburb. Put about 56,000 down because of the purchase price was maybe 230,000 and some change. And it was a five
Wow,
bedroom.
that seems very reasonable. A 5 bedroom in a suburb of Denver for 230.
Yep. And again, this was 2013. So a lot has changed in 10 years. But had some people that I knew that, were living in pretty much just a terrible property. They were looking to find something else. They were renting. So they, wanted something nicer. So I was like, well, hey, I'm looking at this property. Um, you know, I think I'm going to purchase it. And I think the fair market rent is, 1,900 a month. And they were like, that would be awesome. It's a little bit more than what they were paying, but the property was larger and, twice as nice. It had recently been rehabbed. So it was very, very much turnkey. So they were stoked and I was stoked. And, right out of the gate, I was cash flowing about 850 a month. So,
Nice.
on that 56, $1,000 down payment, it was, pretty lucrative right out of the gate. So that kind of changed my thinking. And then from there, it was off to the races. Every 6 to 9 months or whenever we could, scratch together enough for the next down payment, we were picking up a property. So followed that for quite a while. I think we got up to about 10. Um, Everything was going well. And then we decided, hey, let's let's look at the short-term rental market because living in Colorado, it's kind of a destination. There's
Yeah,
lots of
definitely.
resort towns. you know
It's on my bucket list. I wanna go snowboarding in at Vail and Aspen and
oh yeah,
Cop
yeah,
yeah.
there's tons of great ski resorts, snowboarding, and even the summer life in the mountains is great too. Whether it's Grand Lake or hiking, mountain biking, there's a lot of year-round draw, which in the
Right.
short-term rental market is very appealing. So we picked up our first property, purchased it as a second home just because we were allowed to. It was far enough away from our primary. Um, it met the criteria, so we were able to get affordable mortgage on that, given that it was a secondary home. Um, and we used it, for our personal use. And then this was in Grand County, so like close to Winter Park, or between Winter Park and Grand Lake. Not a huge town, but beautiful beautiful area, lots of draw. So picked that place up, turned it into, short-term rental, and immediately the floodgates just opened. When I purchased it, my expectation was, hey, if we can get 10 to 12 days per month, if we can book every single weekend, assuming we're not using it, I'll consider that a win.
Right.
But very, very quickly, we found that there was demand, at least in 2019 for 26, 27, maybe even 28 nights out of the month,
Wow.
consistently. And it was just, people were maybe planning their vacations based on when the properties were available that they wanted to stay at. So that got us very excited about the short-term rental market. Picked up another one shortly after that. It was in December of 2019, and we actually 1031 exchanged my wife's original condo, the one that she lived in before we got married, and then used that the proceeds from that as the down payment on our second short-term rental. So again, we were like, oh, we've got this model figured out. We've got the formula. Spent the first 2 months of 2020 getting that property furnished, decorated, ready to go, photographed, and then boom,
And then
everything.
March 2020 hit.
March 2020 hit, and it was at that time. I mean, you just assumed it was game over. You just didn't know for how long, but
Right.
everything was shut down. There was no short-term rental activity. It was basically, forbidden
Yeah, nobody
by.
was traveling, everybody was locked down.
Correct. So that went on for about 2 months because I remember, they did start to loosen things up where, locals were able to travel, or even people out of state if they wanted to. But we were hosting a lot of locals towards the very end of May. It was right around Memorial Day of 2020. But once that happened, there was just, again, a ton of demand because people had spent the last 2 months like literally locked in their own homes staring at the same, 4 to 8 walls. So
Right.
they wanted to, not necessarily get on a plane, not necessarily go overseas, not get on a cruise, but, get up to the mountains, spend some time outdoors, just something that was considered, modestly safe at the time, but
Right.
still, being able to get away. So those 2 months were a little bit scary. Our long-term rentals, were good. Everyone was able to, pay their rents. A lot of them were getting, um, assistance from the government, if they had been laid off, because a lot of our renters, work in the service industry.
Right.
So, they were able to make their rents. We allowed people extra time if and when they needed it. So, having those long-term rentals at the time, which we had 9, definitely made it a little bit easier to absorb the losses from the short-term rentals.
Yeah, for
But,
sure.
after those, first 2 months, demand picked up. Things were going pretty well, and it's been, pretty smooth sailing since. So yeah, that's the long-winded story of how I got from getting started in real estate to effectively where I am now.
Yeah, that's a great story, and I appreciate the long-winded version. So you started out very young, like you said, you're 43, and 21 years ago, depending if you've had a birthday or not so far this year, that means you were like 21 or maybe 22 years old,
Yeah,
23.
I purchased the home when I was 22, so it was November of 2002. Um, and again, I was able to purchase that home for $235,000 with, I think it was 3% down.
Wow.
So, it was definitely a lot more attractive and a lot easier for someone like myself who, I was making good money. I was making maybe 60,000 a year at the time,
Oh,
working in
wow. That's pretty
working
good for a 22-year-old, right?
yeah, it was good. I was working in, software development. There was a lot of demand for what I was doing. But, you compare that to where things are now, and if you want to get into a, starter home in Colorado, and you're going to be looking at 500,000, you know, in most cases, unless you, get into something that maybe needs a lot more work, then you
Right.
might be, high threes or low fours. But even then, if you're going to put 10,000 down or 10% down, that's a big bite for somebody who's, just getting started in their career.
Yeah, for sure. I do wanna, talk about 2006. I believe you said you purchased your 2nd, possibly 3rd, and then you married your wife in 2009.
Hmm.
And what happened in between there in 2008?
Sure. So, um, obviously, by the summer of 2006, I was living in my second home, and then I had the one income property. Didn't meet my wife until August of 2006. So we were dating, but, as far as our finances and everything else mingling, that, really didn't occur until, after the, Great Recession had, been fully underway.
Right,
Um, but again, the one property I had, they were able to, continue making their rents. I remember exactly what line of work they were in, but I was never profitable at that time anyhow. So, I was kind of used to taking a little bit of a haircut each month when I, made that mortgage payment versus what I was collecting for rent.
right.
But again, I was working in the software industry, and um, I didn't really see any slowdown in my demand for the type of work I was doing. I was a contractor at the time, but I was working for a lot of, bigger name clients who, had a, big um, deep pockets, so they were able
Right.
to, continue, their advertising efforts, and make sure, that they were getting the campaigns launched that they needed to, generate their revenue.
Yeah, so, you know, really great that you were able to kinda go through that 2008, housing and financial crisis more or less unscathed. And like you said, maybe you were taking a little bit of a haircut each month, paying a little bit more in the mortgage than you were collecting in rent, but you also know the long-term value of real estate is gonna go up, so you're just looking at that capital appreciation over time. That has had to have been your mindset?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've always taken like I would say I look at things from I'm willing to take gambles as long as, I do the homework and make sure it's not too much of a risk. I'm
Right.
not the type who is going to just, leverage myself up to the teeth and just hope for the best. So I think that, helped, especially during that era too. I probably could have, taken on more properties at that time at a higher leverage. But, thankfully I didn't really get into any trouble. I saw some, my stock portfolio lost about, I only had like $35,000, but I lost about 30% of it. So that kind of made me a little bit anxious to continue investing. Um, but, real estate I didn't really, suffer too much pain there. So I think that's kind of what continued to push me towards real estate. And then, as opposed to being a, avid stock market investor.
So that's a great segue because obviously I want to talk about your stock market portfolio as well. And I guess,
Mhm.
kind of same question. When did you get into stock market investing? And it sounds like you've lived through now both the 2008 '09 financial crisis as well as what I've been calling the COVID crash of
Sure.
2020. So,
Sure.
yeah, just where did you start? What companies? What sectors?
Early on, I was all over the place. Like, I wouldn't say that I ever had a good strategy. If something was in the news, obviously with Apple being pretty popular during, 2006, 2007, I made some moves there.
Right.
What else? Variety of stuff. I didn't really have uh, index funds weren't really on my radar at the time, and I just was not a disciplined trader, if you will. So,
Hmm.
I'd move in and out of things, kind of based on which direction the wind was blowing, and I got punished for it. Like, I, never
Yeah.
really saw any lucrative returns that got me excited about. Oh, I need to start regularly investing, 300, $500,000 a month. And so what I would do is, when I would accumulate money, I would, put it in my taxable investment account through Fidelity, buy stuff here and there. There would be some big wins, but I'd also, take it on the chin from time to time, and was always just kind of treading water. Like, I didn't ever lose my shorts, but I never had, sizable gains. And then the other part that, made it difficult to really see that, the benefits of long-term investing is I was constantly pulling funds out for the next down payment on in the real estate.
Right.
So, while some might look at it and be like, okay, yeah, you really did not, you're not a good investor. A lot of it, and I agree with that. I have not had a lot of good luck in that realm, but it's also because I was using the capital to, seed additional investments in real estate.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm very curious about like that 2006 and '07 era of Apple. That was right around the time that iPhones were introduced, and obviously iPhones have become like, if not, well, one of, if not the biggest and most popular smartphone on the planet. So,
Mhm.
um, and from what you've just said, I'm guessing you don't still own Apple, or you've been in and out of Apple since then. And
No, I do. It's probably one of the larger positions that I currently hold, along with, Microsoft. I have a fair bit of Tesla, a lot of Shopify, but I would say, 90%, maybe 85% of what I'm holding now is index funds in one form or another.
okay, yeah, interesting. Yeah, so you mentioned Apple, Microsoft, Tesla. And so, like, technology, right? I consider Tesla a technology stock more than an automobile stock.
Sure.
Um, and sir, you said you're software engineer? Was that what you said?
Yeah. So I come from a design background, and then in early, probably 1999, I was introduced to Macromedia Flash. So I kind of, hopped on that horse and rode it as long as I could. So I had a little, it was a great technology to harness. There was a lot of demand for it for quite a long time. Obviously, the writing on the wall was in 2010 when the iPad was released, and they said, "Yeah, we're not going to support this Flash plugin on these devices." So um, at that point, I was like, "Okay, my career, in this field could potentially be over in 6 months, a year, who knows?" It ended up, not actually. Well, it's an interesting story. So when everyone got word that Flash was not going to be supported on Apple devices, a lot of my competition, they fled the market. They went to other technologies, whether it was database or video or whatever it was. But that was all I ever really knew. So I was like, I don't really have anywhere else to go, so I'm just going to stay and do whatever I can and survive as long as I can. And I always equate it to that scene from Forrest Gump when all the other shrimp boats got wrecked and he was basically the only game in town. So
Right.
all the Flash work that was still needed to be done was coming my way. So the best years of my software development, my Flash development career came after the news that Flash was not going to be supported. And that,
Interesting.
that worked out well for maybe 3 or 4 years. And then I noticed a trend was um, as fewer and fewer websites were being built with Flash, the area where there was a lot of need for that technology was like digital banner ads. So a lot of people were coming to me and saying, "Hey, we need to create these display ads for, whether it was Victoria's Secret or Chipotle or the NFL or all kinds of different brands."
Right.
So that kind of, I built a name for myself in that specific realm. And then finally, when it was Google who decided, "Hey, we're not going to display any Flash content unless the user actually clicks to play." So that was actually the final nail in that coffin. But at that time, you know, I just jumped over to HTML and JavaScript and basically continued building the ads, as I had always been doing, but just using a different technology.
Right. So I guess my question or thought process there was because your career was in technology in the tech sector. Is that what drew you to those tech companies to begin with?
I think so. Obviously, there's always that mindset of like, hey, stick with what you know.
Right.
Um, Areas that kind of make sense, or you can see the long term potential. But I also invested in other stocks like Chipotle. But Chipotle was one of my clients, so I was doing a lot of Flash and animation work for those guys. I hold shares of Waste Management, Sherwin-Williams. Um, so I'm pretty open minded. I mean, I would say I'm willing to hold minor positions in a lot of various individual stocks if I see that they are good value or have potential. But anymore, I'm like I don't need to get clever with it. I don't need to try to beat these index funds. They're self cleansing. They're making moves so that I don't have to. I just need to consistently buy in them, and then the thought is 10, 20 years from now, if I can average a 7, 8, 9% return based on doing that, then that will be great. And the cash flow from the real estate, those two things combined, and I'll be in great position.
Yeah, awesome. Let's talk more about index funds and ETFs. I'm guessing some of your favorites are probably like SCHD, VU, JEPI, JEPQ.
My
Um,
biggest position is SPY. I do have some shares of SCHD, VTI, VU. I also have a handful of shares in UPRO, which is like a 3x leveraged version of the S&P. And um, some people are like, "Oh, well, those deteriorate and they don't, this and that." And I'm like, well, as a real estate guy, I believe in leveraged investments. So,
right.
if you believe in, the S&P, then why wouldn't you, leverage up 3x?
Yes. Yeah,
So
no, exactly. And so going back to also what you said about the index funds is, you know, someone else is taking care of that for you, right? Like it's being managed by professional money managers. They look at, say, there's 50 companies in the basket, in that ETF basket. And hey, you know what? Number 48, 49, and 50, we're going to drop those off and pick up
mhm,
these three others. And like you said, it's someone else doing the work for you, which is a really great way to go, in my opinion, right? Just
exactly.
it's hands
And
off investing.
it is. And, to that extent, like one of the positions that I currently hold, luckily I don't hold very much of it, is Peloton. It did great during
Yeah.
the COVID era. I thought I was super clever for, picking up a bunch of shares, but since then it's, just been hammered. Like it's,
Yeah. Destroyed.
down. maybe 90%. I haven't even checked it lately, but I just continued to hold it because we have a Peloton in the house. I ride it a couple times a week. Like I believe in the technology. I believe in the hardware. I think it's maybe if we're lucky, someone like Amazon or Apple will scoop them up, and I'll get rewarded for it.
Yeah.
But I've definitely taken it on the chin by holding that stock. Whereas if Peloton were part of an index fund that I was holding, if it was some, they probably would adjust their position down,
Yeah, for
without
sure.
me having to think about it.
Yeah, you also mentioned, Shopify too, which has kind of been in the news recently, but also through the COVID era, sort of all over the place, similar to the Peloton, having an amazing run through the,
Mhm.
like called it the COVID era.
Yep.
And, now they're into, I believe I heard this week, layoffs. And I think the layoffs actually made the stock price rise because that's the way investors are.
Yeah, they actually had a really incredible week. I think it was up, 25%, 26% one day, and then the next day was maybe 7 or 8%. So that one I'm actually back in the black on. And the reason I got into Shopify is one of my good friends. She's like a senior developer, for that company. Not that she has any insider information for me, but I just, in talking to her, she's someone that I've, worked with uh, over the years for quite a long time, going all the way back to Victoria's Secret. And
Right.
so I value her opinion. I knew she wouldn't be part of that team if she didn't believe in the long term vision. So.
Yeah, and overall, I believe Shopify is a great company as well. Like, it's an incredible platform for entrepreneurs and others,
Mhm.
for buying and selling merchandise and merchandise such as dividends. This is actually on buy investing shirts, as you've probably seen on the ticker symbol below. Give a
Mhm.
shout out to Patrick over there at buyinvestingshirts.com. And of course, you can use the code word Posse for 5% discount. Um, Awesome. Incredible story, incredible, real estate journey. Um, Very interesting on your, uh, stock, stock investing journey as well. A lot of ups and downs, I guess, in both, and that's exactly what investing is. You gotta be prepared for a bit of a roller coaster.
Sure. And to that point, I was actually looking at my performance in my, Fidelity count for the past 10 years. And they have this feature that basically shows, hey, here's what your investment is, and here's what it would be if you were not invested during that period. And I'm basically, below where I would be. So if I had literally just set all my money in cash in that account, I would be better off than I am currently. And a lot of that has to do with, what's happened over the past, 18 months. But
Right.
again, it just kind of, shows that you really need to, be in it for the long haul. And if you're pulling money out or moving money around from, stock to stock, luckily I was pulling money out because I was, moving it into other investments,
Into real estate
mainly
primarily.
real estate. So I don't feel bad about that because it worked out pretty well for me. But it just goes to show that, you need to set it and forget it and not,
Yeah.
make a bunch of changes in the short term because you just cannot beat the market that way.
No, exactly. What's the saying? Uh, the time in the market beats timing the market.
Right.
So, that's obviously an incredible saying. Yeah. And I'm not 100% sure though a position in cash for the last 10 years would be any better simply because of obviously the massive inflation we've seen over the last 2 years.
Mhm.
Inflation is obviously just I think just starting to get under control now, and hopefully we get back down to that reasonable, 2% inflation that is just the 2% that you want to see to help the economy grow and
Right.
not the crazy 7, 8%. I think 1 month in Canada we might even hit 9%. I'm not sure. Like it was crazy inflation, and you're just watching your dollar become less and less valuable.
Right. Well, and speaking of inflation, one of the impacts that's just starting to kind of make itself known, at least here in the States, is anyone who owns property just got their assessed value notification. And they do that every 2 years. So it's basically from, June of 2020 to June of 2022. And several of our properties have seen, between that 2 year span, valuation increases that are 30 to 50% plus, which you know, feels great. Like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, this my investment, I've got a ton of equity. But then once you realize how that translates to your property taxes, it's a pretty sizable hit. And my rough estimates, I don't know exactly what they'll be, but across the 13 properties that we own, I would not be surprised if by the time I have to pay taxes next April, May of 2024, that it'll be 24 to $25,000 more than what I paid this year.
Yeah. Wow. So
So,
kind of the good and the bad of inflation, right? Like your real estate has increased in value, which is incredible. But now
mhm.
because it's increased in value, you're going to be paying way more in tax.
Yeah. Yeah. So, on one side of that coin, I can look and say, well, on paper, my real estate portfolio has increased by, more than $2 million over the past 2 years, which is fantastic. Why wouldn't you want that outcome? But
Right.
on the other side, it's like, all right, now my cash flow is going to take a hit because, these valuations translate to higher property taxes. And then also the other, inflation also impacts the cost of insurance premiums
Yeah.
because the cost to repair a house or replace a roof, those costs go up. And then just your everyday maintenance costs. I rely on a variety of plumbers, handymen, electricians, uh,
Landscapers, no
yeah,
doubt.
landscapers, whatever the task is, repairing a garage door. All of those people, their rates and materials costs go up. So
Yeah.
you know the $25,000 in property tax, I mean, that's just one piece of what I can expect to probably pay. And yeah, it's reasonable for me to try to pass some of those costs on to renters, but they're getting hit with higher inflation costs too. So I want to try to be conscious of that. And
Yeah.
anytime, even though based on the numbers, I could justify saying, hey, my variable costs are increasing by $2,000 on this property. Do I want to go to them and hey, yeah, we'd love to renew, we want to stay, but we can't afford an 8% renewal rate.
Yeah, you don't
So
want them to have to make the choice, do I pay rent or put food on the table, right? You want them to be able to eat and pay their rent, right?
yeah, I definitely don't want to take a slumlord mentality. And when I have good tenants in place, because we have a lot of nice properties that I want to keep them nice. I want them to be long-term investments. I mean, the reason I got into it, and having known quantities, people in there that aren't heavily wearing and tearing on the home, people who pay rent on time. There's a lot of value in that. So if somebody is in there, making the payments, taking care of the property, yeah, I don't want to give them a reason to, need to find something else. And if that reason is, oh, what you were paying 2,500 a month and now you've got to pay, 2,850, that could be that reason. So,
Right.
I'm willing to take a little bit of a loss. If I figure my costs are up 8%, maybe I'll try to give them a 3 to 4% renewal, just to kind of, meet them in the middle. That way, I'm not absorbing, all those costs myself, but I'm also not passing it on to them 100% either.
What does the future hold? Are you gonna buy more properties, buy more short-term rentals, sell a couple properties off?
So we're at the point now where the cash flow from our portfolio of 12 properties, and that includes 3 short-term rentals and 9 long-term rentals, which I think is a great balance. Not people who have maybe 10 short-term rentals, if demand starts to wane a little bit, that could be a sizable, negative impact on their business model. Whereas, I look at it, long-term rentals, those are a necessity. People need a place to live, whereas short-term rentals, that's kind of a luxury purchase.
Right.
So having that blend of 9 long-term and the 3 short-term, I feel like is a good balance. So with that said, am I looking to acquire any more? Not at the moment. With the way prices are and where rates are at. Like I just can't justify. There's minimal margin, if not no margin. So
Right.
it just doesn't make sense for me to put 150, $200,000 down on a property that might cash flow $100 a month if I'm lucky. Because obviously, there's headaches. It's not completely passive. People call you up. They need things. Appliances go out. There's various things happen.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of at the point now where, if anything, I'll probably look to shuffle the deck, where I might say, all right, this property I've had for a while, it's got a lot of equity in it. The ROI doesn't make as much sense as it used to. So maybe I'll liquidate that, do a 1031 exchange into something that, might be a combination of better cash flow, less headache, or greater long-term equity growth potential.
Yeah, so you're pretty comfortable just with the amount of properties you have and not really looking to buy anymore, just maybe sell something to buy something else, like you said, shuffle the deck.
Potentially, or the other, like I said, I'm 43 years old, so um, you know, I don't want to necessarily, die with this huge, $25 million asset portfolio. Maybe over the course of once every 5 years, maybe I'll liquidate one just to kind of, help, sustain lifestyle, or, increase lifestyle maybe, or
Yeah,
travel
slow down a
more.
little bit too, right? Like you said,
Exactly.
if
So, let's say I did take that 5-year approach, where every 5 years, we liquidate a property, we don't 1031 exchange it, we simply just pay the taxes and, pocket whatever the whatever the difference is. If we do that, once every 5 years over the next 20 years, we'll still have a portfolio of 9 properties by the time we're, 63, 65.
right. I just for those of us who don't know, because I have no idea what a 1031 exchange is.
Sure. So a 1031 exchange, it's part of the US tax code that allows you to sell an income property, sell an investment, and then take the proceeds from that investment and roll it into a new real estate investment of like kind, so a similar property, and you don't pay any taxes on that money. Well, you defer the taxes on that
Right.
money. So let's say you buy a house for $400,000, you keep it for 10 years, and then you sell it for $800,000. If you're lucky,
Yeah.
let's say it was the past 10 years. So now, you might only owe 200,000. So the equity you have in that home is 600,000. If you were to sell that, you would be hit with capital gains tax. And, for someone like us, that would be 20%. So I would have to write a check to the government for $150,000. The 1031 exchange allows me to take all 600 of that 600,000 and roll that into the acquisition of a new property, um, without paying, that 150,000 in taxes. That the juice is cooking though. So that 150,000 that I would have owed is still part of the equation with the new property. So if in 10 years I sell that property, then that 150,000 in, back, capital gains taxes would still apply.
Wow. So basically, you're deferring the tax to a later date.
Yep. And so what that allows you to do is, if someone is, hardcore enough or savvy enough, they could potentially just 1031 exchange for the rest of their life. And then, when they die, the home would become part of the estate. And if it's not in excess of the estate tax threshold, then the heirs could theoretically, not have to pay those taxes. But it's one of those things where, you have to just kind of decide, like, are you in growth mode, or are you, like you said, just trying to take it easy and, simplify your life a little bit, maybe remove some stress. And if you are, then maybe it makes sense to say, hey, this has been a great run. My, $50,000 investment from 2013 is now worth 600,000. I can go ahead and pay some taxes on that,
Right.
pocket the rest, and, use it to supplement my lifestyle.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting take. Interesting because obviously, those of us living outside of the U.S. have no idea what the U.S. tax code is like, and
Right.
probably a lot of Americans who aren't into the real estate investing don't really know what that is either. So
Sure.
interesting bit of information there for sure. And yeah, very interesting story. I do want to pull up your pinned tweet. If you just give me 2 seconds here, I have
Cool.
it. Um, I'm just going to read it.
Yep.
Many will tell you that one's home is not an asset. If that's true, then how did I spend the past 7 years leveraging my home's equity to acquire three additional income properties worth a combined 2.6 million that cash flow more than 6K per month? So just a very interesting pin tweet, and I guess just any reflections on your thought of that tweet.
So the reason I wrote that tweet is just based on kind of the financial Twitter, um, ongoing question debate: is somebody's home an asset or is it a liability?
Right,
My stance has always been yeah, it's definitely an asset. The mortgage that you carry on that house, that's your liability.
right,
The home itself is an asset that you can borrow against through either a HELOC or a cash out refinance, or it's something that you could liquidate completely. Obviously, you have to sort out where you're going to live after you do that. But the fact that it holds value, is effectively a store of value that you can liquidate in part or in whole, makes it an asset. And an example of how I really maximized that was, I believe it was early 2015. Had a lot of equity in the home I was living in at the time. So we did a cash out refinance. And part of that was to capture a lower interest rate. So even if we didn't pull any cash out, just lowering the interest rate made sense for us to refinance at the time. But that money that I pulled out, I believe it was $150,000, based on the amount of equity that we had in the home. I used 125 of that to purchase another income property in Denver. Purchased it for $425,000, and then immediately was cash flowing, I think, $800 per month. But so that $800 was coming in, and then obviously by doing a cash out refinance, I increased the mortgage balance on my primary. So the amount I was paying, I think it was like $325 more per month. So that in itself proved to be a win. So I'm making an additional 800 a month um, in cash flow, and I'm only paying an extra 325 per month in my increased mortgage on my primary. Obviously, the other value add is the fact that, okay, now we own another piece of real estate that is going to be, appreciating. We have a renter in it who's, paying that mortgage, helping to pay down that principal. And that home that we purchased in 2015, based on my notice of valuation from the local assessor's office, is $800,000. So that $125,000 investment is now, translated to 3 or 4x return.
right. You mentioned HELOC. Again, I have no idea what that is.
A HELOC.
Yeah,
So a HELOC is an acronym. It stands for a home equity line of credit. And what that allows you to do is say, all right, I own a house that's worth $500,000 and I only owe $300,000 on it. So
right,
a home equity line of credit is saying, all right, we're going to let you borrow against that $300,000 in equity that you have. They don't let you borrow up to the full amount. They usually take it as a factor of maybe 85 or 90%.
yeah,
So 90% of 500,000, that would be 450. And if you only owe 200,000 on it, then basically you could get a line of credit that is worth $250,000. And that money just sits there in an account that you have access to. It's typically a variable interest rate. So, depending on when you secured it, it might be 3%, or right now, I think mine's sitting at 7.49% just due to the higher interest rates. But it's not costing me any money unless I put it to use.
right,
So I can sit there and leave it untouched for 3 years, and then if an opportunity comes along, I can say, all right, well, I'm going to draw against this, rather than draining my taxable retirement account. I can leverage the equity in my home to seize this opportunity to buy another piece of real estate, or invest in a small business, or even just say, hey, you know what, the stock market's been clobbered. I think that the 5 or 6% rate that I would be charged to leverage or to use these HELOC funds, I think I can outperform that by investing it in index funds.
right. So actually, I had just never heard that acronym before, but
Hmm.
we have very similar here in Canada, where the value of your house minus what you left still owing on the mortgage, you can get the difference in a line of credit, and I'm sure there's probably that similar percentage of the
Hmm.
95%. So yeah, we have a very similar thing here. Like I said, I just had never heard the acronym before, so
Oh yeah,
interesting.
there you go. I don't know. We must like it just because it rolls off the tongue so easily. HELOC.
Yeah, it does sound good, right?
Mhm.
Cool, cool. This has been an amazing conversation. Is there anything else you want to touch on before we sign off?
Um, Let me think. I mean, I think just kind of looking forward, like I said, we have our 9 long-term properties and then the short-term rentals. I think that, where I'm looking towards like having to maybe endure the most volatility is definitely in the short-term rental market right now.
Right,
One of the things that we saw, we purchased 2 of our properties before COVID, and then the third one we picked up in early 2021. But during the COVID area, a lot of people had, a lot for whatever reason, whether it was the PPP loans that we used to kind of help businesses stay afloat during COVID, or um, putting a pause on student loan payments, or whatever it was that allowed people to have, a higher level of disposable income. A lot of people use that money to purchase, second homes or short-term rentals, which, me watching this happen, I was like, okay, hopefully there's enough demand to sustain it. But, with any sort of supply and demand equation, if you drastically increase the supply of short-term rentals, um, you know, is the demand going to hold? And it did for a while, just because, a lot of people were traveling with their excess liquid capital.
right,
But now we're starting to see, things change a little bit. Demand maybe is falling, or not a ton. Like, I wouldn't say the alarms are sounding, but I just don't know that the demand is able to maintain pace with the amount of supply in these resort communities, or even, metropolitan communities. There's a lot of people who, rent short-term rentals, and we stayed at one in Atlanta recently, and we have them here in Denver. So it's not just the resort towns, but it's, any place where somebody might want to travel and consider staying, at a private residence rather than a hotel. So I think there's going to be a bit of volatility. The people who purchased their short-term rentals in the past year at the inflated prices with the higher rates, they may not have. It might get a little tough for them if demand, begins to wane. They're,
right,
being able to, depending on what their situation is, if they bought that home to say, hey, we want to have a place of our own that we can, use on the weekends, or, go up to once a month. And yeah, we're going to rent it out as a short-term rental just to, help put a dent in our mortgage payments. But even if we don't rent it out at all, we're happy to just keep the home for ourselves. Those people will probably be fine. But there's a lot of people who are decided, hey, this could be a good side hustle for me. I'm going to buy this property as an investment, based on the, hope that I can cash flow, you know, 1,000, 2,000, $5,000 per month. And if that's what they, base their purchase on, and those numbers, don't pan out the way they had hoped,
right.
how long can they last? So I feel like if there's any area of the housing market that is going to um, get challenging, it could be the short-term rental market.
So yeah, destination is obviously important. Like they have always said in real estate, location, 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 right? And
Mhm.
obviously a state like Colorado, as we mentioned before, people love to flock to to the outdoor nature, and I'm sure tons of other things that Colorado has to offer. Um, this is kind of on a personal note. So in my city, we are allowed to build a. They used to be called a coach house, but
Mhm.
now they're called a, I believe, secondary dwelling unit, or
Yep.
something like that.
Yeah, in the States, we call it a ADU, which is an ancillary dwelling unit.
Right. So I've been kind of toying with the idea of building a tiny home in my backyard as an Airbnb,
Mhm.
but I just don't know if where I live is like destination. If there would be enough demand for somebody to stay in a tiny home in my backyard.
Sure. I mean, have you done the research just like on Airbnb to see what other offerings there are in your community?
I no, I haven't really got past the idea
Uh,
in my head process.
I mean, it's a good idea to have, and I would say, walk the path just to see, like, hey, is it something that, makes sense in this community? See what other people are doing, and if, there's an opportunity to I mean, I don't know what it would cost to, put that pad, and then,
Right.
or what kind of facilities or amenities you'd be looking to offer. But I would definitely say it's worth looking into, especially if you already own the land,
Right.
because that
I own
makes,
half the land. The bank owns the other half.
well, there you go. But my point being is, if you have the ability and your municipality would allow such things, it might be worth doing. And then even if it's not a short-term rental, I mean, you could consider like a long-term rental, someone who works in the area who just doesn't need a ton of space.
Right. No, that's a interesting take. Oh, awesome. This has been just an incredible conversation. You have, yeah, an incredible story, like incredible path. That's obviously one of the things I've loved so much about hosting the Passive Income podcast. Talking to so many different people and so many different paths and journeys and stories. And, yours is right up there with one of the best of them. I love the fact that you started so young, and, it's definitely, whether it's real estate or stocks or, dividend growth strategy, just get started. I'm sure you can agree with that sentiment, right? Just, I've said it so many times before, just get on base.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think that ties directly into the fact that, time is your best asset. Um, you
Yeah,
know, if you give yourself enough time and, you know, even stick to just modest return investments, it's hard to fail.
right. Yeah, exactly, exactly. One last question. So when you bought that first property in, I believe you said 2002,
Correct.
and you were 22 years old, was the seed already planted to expand into real estate investing, or no thought at that point in your life?
No thought really. I mean, the only real exposure I had. So my dad, he he would buy a house, live in it, and then he would fix it up, sell it for a profit, buy a bigger house, do the same thing. So he never really like acquired income properties, but I saw him just kind of take that, rehab approach to
Right,
add equity over the course of 7-8 year period. And I think a lot of the difference then, so his run was in the 90s. He'd buy a house while he was living in it. He would either finish the basement, remodel the kitchen, you know, take an old house that was, mediocre, a little bit beat up, make it nice and sell it. But the idea of, having a short-term rental or even a long-term rental, there was minimal tools to facilitate that. If you had a rental, you stuck a sign in the yard and you waited for somebody to call you on the phone.
right.
The internet was not, something that he could leverage. He was not technically savvy as well. So it was a lot harder for someone like him or anyone during that era to capitalize on, the rental market,
Yeah,
given the lack of tools that, people like us take for granted, whether
yeah,
it's Zillow, whether it's Airbnb, whether it's, all the Google Docs and sheets and emails and everything that we use. Like, there's just so much of that technology that made what I do currently next to impossible 20 years ago,
right.
25 years ago.
Yeah, no, I'm old enough to remember the '90s quite well myself, and yeah, it was, if you wanted to find something, you went to the Yellow Pages, right? And
Yep,
if you weren't in that city, or you were traveling to some other city, you basically almost had to get there and then flip through the Yellow Pages of that city's phone book.
exactly. And even investing in the stock market was a challenge back then. You if you wanted, I mean, I don't even know how, did you just call a stockbroker? That was before I really got into it. And if you wanted to see what the price of a given stock was, you could check the newspaper to see what it was at the beginning of the day, or you could, maybe tune into one channel, watch for 10 minutes and just hope that it, crawls across the ticker on the bottom of the screen. Whereas
Right.
now, you within 2 seconds on any mobile device, you can see the current, price
Yeah.
of any stock. So definitely, whether it's investing in, the stock market, index, I mean, a lot of index funds didn't exist back then. So there's just been a lot that has changed that has made it so much easier for people to, get their side hustle on,
Yeah.
get involved with some sort of investment, whether it's completely passive like stock market, index funds, crypto, which I know we didn't really touch on, which is not really my area of expertise,
Right.
real estate, all those things. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what the technology landscape looks like in 5, 10 years, especially with what we're starting to see in artificial intelligence. I don't know how that's necessarily going to impact
Yeah.
investing or real estate, but I'm sure one way or another it's going to
Impact
get
everything.
involved. Yeah.
There's a great past episode of the Passive Income Podcast. The guest was Master P. His Twitter handle is at OptGuru, and he went quite in depth talking about buying and selling stocks in the 90s,
Hmm.
carrying a roll of quarters with him so he could make calls to a stockbroker from a payphone, and having his 16-digit PIN, on a piece of paper in his wallet. So definitely check that episode out if you haven't seen it already.
Nice. Will
And
do.
um, thank you so much, Joe, for coming on and spending nearly an hour of your time with me here this morning on the Passive Income Podcast. I truly appreciated everything. Like I said, incredible backstory, and all the best for the future. Whether you decide to buy more or start to slowly sell off and slow down. Yeah, like I said, all the best and
Great. I appreciate it.
awesome. Thank you. If you're still watching, and I hope you are, be sure to hit like and subscribe.